Joshua, welcome back. It looks like,
Hey man, good morning.
yeah, good morning. We get a chance to retake some of the recording that we got cut off on Saturday. Apparently, I'm not sure if we were being our 21 followers was threatening the the powers that be. We're trying to talk about the question that we're trying to discover or explore is who is Jesus really, right? That was the question that we were uh, approaching when all of a sudden, I don't know if it was an alien invasion or what happened, but my screen was giving me a no connection message while my internet signal was full, my other computer was fully operational, everything in my house was just fine,
Yeah,
except
I think it's worth putting out there too, especially for the listeners, because we had talked about being under some sort of spiritual attack, and
yeah,
it sounds tinfoily, but to be honest, like we had just finished over an hour podcast without issue, and as soon as we transitioned to who is Jesus, pew, like
yeah, it
that's
was
wild.
weird. It was weird, and I almost did just for fun today. I almost put a tinfoil hat on to start the episode at least. Um, and it's funny because Saturday afternoon, I did go over to my brother's neighbor's house. He was having a little get together, and I was talking to some people, and I told them what happened. And I was like, I know this sounds crazy, but this is what happened. I was laughing about it with people, but also I was laughing because it is deep down. I was like, man, there's something weird going on here. Like that was a strange thing because we had spent an hour, like you said, recording already with no problems. And then the instant we switched to the idea of Jesus, and all we talked about was the fact that historically it was a real person. Then all
Yeah,
of a
that's as
sudden,
far as we got.
that's it. That's it. They were like, stop saying that. And it's funny because I have been talking to a lot of people who are interested in these ideas as well about this whole the aliens and the interdimensional beings that are being pushed right now by certain political figures. And I always tell people, I say, listen, I don't know for certain, right? Let me start with that. I don't know anything for certain, right? What I can talk about is what I've experienced in my own life and the way that I've interpreted it. And it seems to me to be a very real thing that there is a battle between dark and light, if you will, good and evil. There is there is a real pull towards, and to me, the easiest way that I can wrap my mind around it is darkness, right? And there is a real light. So I've experienced it for myself, right? Anytime I try to head towards the light, anytime I continue to head towards the light, there is a pull, a massive, real energy shift. Again, it sounds hokey, it sounds weird, but something trying to get in the way. And my own experience. I mean, my journey has been one into darkness, and now back, at least facing the light and trying to move toward it. It's it's wild to me, especially like we were joking about with is there something that got in the way on Saturday? I'm not completely convinced that there's not. Right? Do I understand it now? Just barely. I don't have a textbook, right, that tells me exactly what's going on here. But I do have a book that I'm reading through again to try to understand it. And I'm in Maccabees now. Just so you know, I've gotten into the first book of Maccabees. I think I'm about 14 or 15 chapters in. But yeah, in that book, it talks about the thing that we want to talk about the most today, and it's who is Jesus, right? We started with he was historically a real person, and I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here. I don't think it's even necessary for someone to actually believe that he was necessarily a historical figure, right? For the story to make sense, right? But as far as you can tell, if you do the Quest for the Historical Jesus, which was a book written to see, it was this man real? It seems as though he was. And it seems as though that he was alive around the time that the Bible says he was. And that a lot of what he had to say is written down. And, the people involved, Pontius Pilate and those others, seems to be like that was real. There's a historical basis for all of this. Now, there are circles of people who say, well, there was no census around the time that the Bible claims that there was. There's different overlap between names of people who are given in the Gospels. But we'll probably jump down that one at another time. But I want to start with you, seeing when somebody says to you, if somebody doesn't know anything about Jesus, what's the first thing that you want them to know? What's the first thing that you would tell somebody who said, I've heard a little bit about it, but what's this real story? What's important about this guy? What's your answer?
Don't think people should ask me that question, because I tend to answer it a little too deeply for it to make sense, and I'm trying to find a way to be more conversationally approachable with that, because if you say, hey, who is Jesus? And I'm like, well, hold on a second. We got to unpack the Old Testament for that question to even make sense. But, if you ask a sweet little old lady at church, she's like, oh, he's my Lord and Savior. He is love. He came into my life when I just didn't have anything else to live for. Like, you have a lot of those very experiential, relational answers. And where I think that's relationally important for people to have that point of connection where they can explain it from their experience, because that's your testimony, right? That's your message.
Sure.
I just think it misses a huge beat on who Jesus actually is. And as somebody who studied this stuff, and I'm just kind of sort of intellectually minded, like I always say, yeah, but why is, because as an electronic engineer and maintenance technician, I always look for systems and connections. So that's exactly how I approach the biblical text. I was like, well, where's the pattern here? What's happening? Why is it happening? Why? I'm always like, but why? How? I'm that guy. I got to know how it works. I can't just say, I pick up this phone and I can send a text message and you're going to get it. And some people are okay with that. As long as it works, they don't care. Right. I'm not that guy. I think, well, how is that happen? How is these texts that I'm seeing on my screen digitized and then transmitted through the airwaves and radio frequencies and picked up and disseminated and combined and then decombined? And how do you get it instant time? We're vast away from Pony Express. How did we get here? Right.
Right. I mean, how are we able to do that?
That's how I approach the Bible. So if somebody says, hey, who is Jesus? I'm going to say, you need to go ask that young lady over there. No, I don't mean to be dismissive, but it is, to me, it's, Jesus is the culmination of hundreds of prophecies. He's God come to earth as man to do what man couldn't do. To me, it's funny to me because it's like this like legal loophole that God wrote into the story. It's like, hey, I had this law, and in order to fulfill the law, you have to follow it perfectly. And the law exposes that we are imperfectly able to follow a perfect law. And because of what Adam did, Adam being man, brought the fall, brought the sin and death into the world, the curse, the groaning creation. So God's like, basically, hey, man did it, man's got to fix it. That's just how this works. That's how my law works. It has to be reconciled by the means by which it was broken. And so man's like, well, what are we going to do? That's impossible. And it's the way it's laughable to me is because in all of this speaking about the glory and holiness of God and nobody can touch his perfection, he goes, "Oh yeah, I actually took care of that too. What I'm going to do is, because man has to fix this problem, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come to earth as a man and solve the problem that you caused because you can't do it. So I'm going to fix it for you by coming to earth as a man." It's like a little loophole there, like a legal loophole. Like, man has to adjudicate this problem, and they can't. So I'm going to become a man and do it for you. So that's how he becomes the savior of mankind, is by becoming mankind and solving the problem that was created by mankind. It's a enormous, beautiful, amazing, really cool story. But to just wrap him up as, well, he's my Lord and Savior, and I just love him so much. You want some cookies? I can't get into that.
Yeah, it is funny to me. So being similarly minded, right? So I was a theology major. I was a theology and philosophy double major, obsessed with the idea of understanding, and not just understanding, but the exploration of ideas, right? That's why even introducing this is, the question that we're looking to explore here is this, because that's really what's interesting to me, is exploring, right? And I do love the idea of exploring the idea of who Jesus is. Now, because in a way, like what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say, or the way that my mind reinterprets it, is he was a promise, right? He is the fulfillment of a promise. And when I look at the historical accounts of the Bible, right, and what is the Old Testament, especially in the beginning, what is it really? Because there's so much about and I don't want to get distracted by Genesis here, because we could go on 10-hour episodes on Genesis alone, right?
Let me tell you a quick aside on that. When my son was in middle school, we did homeschooling. And I
Yes.
was in the middle of finishing my bachelor's degree in theology and business. And so I was like, all this information was something new, like it was fresh. And I went
Exciting.
on the homeschool portal and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about offering up a co-op for for homeschool families to do creation to the cross, like a full spectrum class from
And you're supposed to
Genesis
do this
to
in
the book
9
of
weeks, right?
Exodus." 9 months, 180
9
school
months.
days or
Okay.
whatever.
9 months. Okay.
But not even. We're meeting once a week.
Right. Right.
I grossly overestimated my ability to navigate from the
Yeah.
cross. I mean, from creation to the cross. After
Absolutely.
9 months, meeting an hour every
Yeah.
week, we got
Yeah.
all the way to the end of Genesis.
Yes. That's why I love Genesis. It is a book, and that's what I was getting at, is it's a book that's so packed, right? Because it's the oldest part, right? Genesis, meaning, kind and being, right? Kind and beginning, I'm sorry, or origin. A genesis of a thing would be the origin of the thing, right? But it's also the root from which kind or type comes from, right? Hence genes. So there's overlap in the interpretation, but it's quite interesting, that overlap, to me, right? That's the way my mind loves to play with the game, of pulling all these truths that are evident at the same time together. In Genesis, the story there's an older story that Genesis is born on, and quite, from a practical standpoint, it makes sense, which is the Enuma Elish. You have the old Sumerian text, and you also have the the Egyptian story of creation and beginning. And the Genesis story is the Judeo-Christian account, it's the minus the Christian, right? It's the Jewish account, the Israelite
Right.
attempt to make sense of the beginning and why we're here. And then, of course, the Judeo-Christian Church puts it together into one book, which I think is very important. We started to talk about the fact that there are religious denominations, there are Christian denominations that really only hand out the New Testament because the whole story of Jesus, which is central in the New Testament, is what they value the most, they being those that see it that way, those of us who see it that way. Now, I personally, and I know that you and I are in the same persuasion here, that you're going to miss out on so much if you cut the old from the new and just
Sure.
think the second
But to be
part.
fair, to be fair, the idea of milk before meat, right? Understanding Jesus is tantamount to even wanting to go back and look at the Old Testament. And I'll be honest, the Old Testament would be really hard to digest without motivation of wanting to find Jesus in it.
This is true. This is true because there's so many thou shalt nots, and then there's so many law prescriptions and genealogies that just don't seem. It's like why are we spending so much time here? I think I reached out to you maybe when I was in Numbers, and I was like, oh my gosh, right? And it was it's interesting, right? It's like, okay, I just got to get through Numbers. But the point that I was making was that the promise that Jesus is, right, the fulfillment of a promise is, again, another controversial thing that I'll say today is I don't believe that it's necessary for somebody to believe in a literal translation of the accounts in order to actually understand the value in the story. Because Genesis has been condensed into the most essential parts, right? So that's why when you read one sentence, it is packed with information. And why it takes 9 months to get through the single book, because one sentence is all the meaning all the extra words were taken out. And so now in one sentence, 3 sentences, all of the meaning that was in a story that preceded it it's all been shrunken down to the most essential parts. And so they're fully loaded with a ton of information and meaning. And sure. I say that to transition to the entire story in the Gospels. When the angel comes to Mary and says, hey, you're going to have a child and you're going to name him Jesus. And he will be Emmanuel, which means God is with us. The language that is used by the angel, so to speak, to give this message is language that she, as a Jew of that time, as an Israeli, and not modern day, right, but an Israelite, that is language that she would have understood, hearkening back to something important, right? It would have been enough information for her to know what was being said, because some of the critiques that you hear about the Bible in particular, depending on who you're speaking with, is going to be, well, why wouldn't he just come out and say it? God, why wouldn't God just come out and say that this is what's happening here? Hey, pause. God is coming down. It's going to be crucified. This is the Messiah coming. Right? Why is the message obscured? To me personally, I think that goes to part of the mystery of who God is. But it's what they would have understood at the time to be real. For example, the message is even insofar as John leaping in the womb, right? Because John the Baptist is 6 months along, right, being carried by his mother when Mary goes and visits her sister, right? And the child leaping in the womb is similar to the reaction of Moses in the seeing the tabernacle, right? Or Elijah. I'm sorry, it is Elijah seeing the tabernacle, and he jumps because that is what Mary is becoming. Mary is the tabernacle. Mary is the person who's carrying, right, the thing that carries this promise, this fulfillment of a promise from the beginning. It's rich. The information in the Bible, the words, the stories, they're rich, right? And if you don't understand it, it seems foreign, right? If you don't get that part of it. And so there's a huge value in it. But when you talk,
you speak something I just want to hit on before you move on from that.
Yeah, go for
it. We talked last podcast about giving the Bible permission to do literary things and employ literary mechanics that we do today without thinking about it. For instance, if, let's say, I tell my daughter, hey, I'm going to the store and I'm going to pick up some steak, some eggs, I'm going to get some potatoes and lettuce, cucumber, and tomato for a side salad, and that's what's going to be for dinner. Sound good? Good. Sound like something you want to eat? Great. And then I leave. And then my son comes down and says, hey, where's dad? And my daughter says, he went to the store to get some things for dinner. Now, she said basically the same thing I said, but she left out all the ingredient lists because it wasn't pertinent to exchanging the information that was necessary for him to have to understand where I was. Right? See, the Bible does this. It especially you talk about in Genesis, there's a lot of fat trimmed out to get to the point. But also, Moses is an ancient Near East person writing to an ancient Near East audience, and he's employing literary devices and jargon and vernacular and symbology to tell the people he's trying to convey the message to in terms, like you just said, in languages that they would have used, using idiomatic languages and similes that make sense for the time. Mm-hmm. And among other things, Genesis being the Hebrew account of creation, it's also written as very poetic, allegorical, polemic. And for the listeners who don't understand what a polemic is, that's simply, in the biblical application, it's a theological writing that not only tells the proper story from the Jewish Hebrew standpoint, but it also takes a jab at and corrects other surrounding religious beliefs that have misconstrued what actually happened. So when you're talking about the Enuma Elish and you're talking about the Egyptian, also the Zep Tepi, right, talking about the age before the flood, God walked among men. The Mesopotamian area during that era is it's got this surrounding fertile crescent. You know, you got the Akkadian language, you got Sumerian language, you got the Sumerian kings list, you got all this stuff going on. People are trying to make sense of what they have observed, right? So it seems like what you have is a shared historical memory. If anything else, you could say, hey, all these different cultures are talking about the same event. The details are a little squirrely because they're trying to piece together what's happening. So the fact that the Bible comes along and writes a corrected story of it after the Sumerians doesn't mean they stole it. It means there's a shared collective memory, and basically God comes down and creates supernaturally creates the Israelites by allowing Abraham and Sarah to actually give birth in old age, which seemed impossible.
Which is a motif that continues throughout, right? And it's even part of the Jesus story, insofar as constantly there is this hand of God in the Old Testament that keeps coming into play and saying, hey, even though you guys are way beyond the age, we're going to continue the line, right? The descendants are
the continued theme is with man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible. So there's a lot of times where things happen that only happen because God allows it to happen so that he can get the glory for it. So
the same thing with people the angel coming to Zechariah. Right? It's the same thing with the angel coming to Zechariah. It's the same thing with the angel coming to Mary and Joseph, right? Because remember, Joseph was going to let her go quietly, right? It's like, okay.
Right.
It's like he was a man of honor, right? And he wasn't going to out her, per se, for having a child without knowing man, right, is the way the book puts it. And the angel comes to him and says, no, it's okay. This is what's going on. And he goes, oh, okay. Whoa, that's pretty big, right? Could you imagine being in Joseph's shoes? Like, what?
I just picture Joseph being on like an episode of Maury. Like, who's the dad?
You are kind of.
What's your story? What's the story you've concocted? Yeah.
Right. It is.
Exactly. It's wild.
But yeah, it is a constant motif, and I'm glad you bring that up too, because here's the thing that people don't understand, right? We talk about the God of the Bible, right? And the God of the Old Testament isn't the God that I worship. The God of the New Testament is, right? It's like, wait a minute. What you don't understand is that how difficult life was, right? You're talking about all these different peoples that are in the same region. The Chalcedonians, Amorites, that right? You name. I mean, go through the Old Testament and try to keep track of how many different peoples there are. Well, as they conquer each other, quite literally, right? The kings come with their armies and they conquer. Well, the prevailing wisdom of the day was whichever God was worshipped by that community, by that kingdom, is the God that was winning, right? And that was the God that you worshipped. And that's the whole story is the Israelites are constantly being defeated, and the miracle of even today, looking back, is how did their God survive, right? And now our story is, well, because it was the one true God, right? That's what we've developed over time. Is just like, well, yeah, because the way that deity, that divine being, would have to intercede, you can come up with no other explanation than the fact that it has to be real. There's something to this story, right? And so then when Jesus comes on the scene, so to speak, right, when we get to that point where Mary gets the annunciation, Joseph is told it's okay, it is a divine thing, right? We are acting here, right? This is God coming to you. I'm his messenger, right? All of these things unfold, and now we get this child born in a manger. And it's at the time of Augustus, who is arguably the greatest emperor of all time, but he was also seen as a god, right? The emperor of Rome is the perfect leader. It's Pax Romana, right? It's the peaceful existence of the Roman Empire at this point, right? It's a very benevolent state, so to speak, right, at the time. And now it's that juxtaposition between the perfect human leader, right, this peaceful being, this peaceful place, this perfect king, emperor, God, and then here comes in the lowliest form the true God, right? So from a poetic standpoint, it is mind-blowing to when you read that and you put it in historical context and you go, oh my God, the story is so much more in it, right? Even that little detail, I guarantee you 80% of people out there who are familiar with the New Testament never looked at it in that specific way, right? It's like, no, because it's so juicy, right? When I bite into a ribeye, that beautiful marbling, right? It's in that story. Again, this coming back around to it and realizing, oh my God, there's so much in it. There's so much wisdom that I walked away from because I didn't have wisdom as a youngster, right? I think it's pretty hard too. But I say that because at 12 years old, Christ is found, right? Jesus, right? It's found by his parents. His parents leave Jerusalem, right, with a caravan. They're on this journey. And they look around, they get to a camping point, a stopping point, and they look around for their son. And they're like, where's Jesus? Looking among their kinfolk, they say, right? And they can't find him. So they have to go back to Jerusalem. And he's in the temple. He is with the learned, the educated, the holy men of the time. And he's holding his ground, right? Asking questions and having conversations with these people who are, the most educated in the religious tradition at the time. And of course his parents, Joseph and Mary, say to him, what are you doing? We've been looking for you. Well, didn't you know I'd be in my father's house?
Right.
It's just such a funny moment, right, in the Bible, if you think about it. And the next verse says, and they didn't know what the heck he was talking about. if you interpret into today's language, is what's said. It's like they didn't know.
And to be honest, anybody even today with teenagers can relate to that moment.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. But that's kind of how the story emerges, and then all of a sudden, we don't hear much more except Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God until we get to John the Baptist. And what's so funny is, so you have the story of Elijah and Elisha, right, the prophets in the Old Testament, is echoed by the John the Baptist picture. Like, why does Jesus need to be baptized in the River Jordan, right? And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. He's God, right? Well, up to this point, we don't really know too much about Jesus yet, right? But he comes forward, and John even says to him, John the Baptist is the first one to ask this question. He's like, what are you doing? Like, I can't baptize you. Like, you're, hello, what are you doing here? And he says, just trust me. And Jesus is like, just, dude, go along with it. This is your role, right? This is the role that you need to play. So just let's go about the proper roles, right? And John goes, all right, I mean, if you're God, right, you're saying it, right? And it's a very funny interaction when you read it in context too, right? And then he baptizes Jesus, and that's where we have the descendants of the Spirit of God in the form of a dove, right? And it's this whole, this is my child. And in one account, it's you are my child, with whom I am well pleased. And in another account, it's this is my son, in whom I am well pleased. And it's kind of that moment of Jesus' beginning of ministry, right? It's kind of the introduction that
it inaugurates his ministry. Yeah.
What's that?
I said, yeah, it inaugurates his ministry. But also, if you think about from an application standpoint, we have this, was referred to as the hypostatic union, right? That Jesus is fully man and fully God at the same time. But in his earthly fully man ministry, he's also kind of going through what the expectations of the day would require, right? He's still, until he fulfills the law, he's a man under the law, right? And he kind of side skirts that by showing that he has the authority to usurp or override the law because he is, the Messiah, right? Allowing his disciples to walk and eat on the Sabbath and that kind of thing. But he's facilitating his role, his position, right? And so some of this is the fact that he's entering into a ministry with Pharisaic leaders who are going to try to challenge his qualification to do so. And so some of this is walking lock and step with the expectation of the theology, the religion of the day in some points, in order to say, I am the teacher, I am the Christ. And he starts showing all these miracles later, but this is just inaugurating that ministry. And it's funny because when you get into Acts, that they're going to talk about this baptism process. At one point, I forgot the actual verse and chapter, but the disciples tell these believers, like, well, you had John's baptism, baptism of repentance, but now you need to get baptized in the Holy Spirit. But why? And because basically what they're doing is, before they were baptized into the law,
right.
Repentance, the law.
Exactly.
But now that Jesus has fulfilled the law, it's like a changing of trajectory and a changing of allegiance. It's like you're no longer baptizing yourself into the law. You're baptizing yourself into the Christ who fulfilled the law. And that's why that transition happened. All of Acts is making that transition to, all right, believing Jews of the day, here's what this new covenant looks like. Gentiles, welcome to the club. This is what this looks like. So you see them trying to peel back the layers of this history of law following to say, hey, the law is fulfilled. This is what the new covenant looks like with a fulfilled law. And the Jews are having a hard time. They're having a hard time reconciling that. And I actually brought up Daniel because I wanted to read it to kind of help understand their confusion of how to figure this out, right? So when they're reading, and it's also worth noting, a lot of people, because just to kind of add an apologetic here for the historical Jesus, people talk about there should have been writings everywhere. Well, in the first century, Jewish era, it's not like today where everybody's going to school starting at 4 years old until they're 18, reading and writing. The large majority of the populace is illiterate as far as reading and writing. So that's like the reason they go to the temple and have the scrolls and the scriptures read to them is because the large portion of the society can't read. They're fishermen, they're farmers. They're not reading and writing. it wouldn't be as prevalent today where you have Facebook posts and text messages and tweets flying all over the place. Like there's
Right.
the amount of data 1,000 years from now that people could look back and like, good Lord, these people shared everything. This person was having steak 4 times a week. We
Yeah.
have an abundance of data sharing. That's just not the same of a culture kind of transitioning from a lot of stuff which was oral tradition and finally getting it pinned down like, hey, we need to write this stuff down. And I think it was actually Aristotle who said that men shouldn't learn to write because basically it's going to make them stupid. Because when they have things written down, they're not going to be forced to memorize it, and so they're going to have all this stuff to read at the detriment of their inability to memorize what they should, memorize, and the abundance of things. So there's a lot of stuff, oral history, and it was really good oral history. It's not like the telephone game. This is a very different culture. They're telling
Right.
it over and over again to be concise. But anyway, back to the point. Daniel 7, verse 13 through 14, if anybody wants to go look it up. This is what they're waiting for, right? They're confused because they have this Yahweh mindset from the ancient Near East, from the Old Testament. And Daniel says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. So they're trying to come to terms with the fact that when they talk about like a son of man, he's parsing the idea of somebody being a son of man from humans
Mm-hmm.
versus sons of God, which in ancient Near East vernacular almost always refers to Elohim, or spiritual beings,
Mm-hmm.
angels. So so this person's going to be like a man, but he's going to be also heavenly, but
Mm-hmm.
he's also going to be enthroned and worshipped and eternal. Like they're like, what does that even look like?
Mm-hmm.
And then Jesus comes on the scene at the time of Roman imperialism, where they're waiting to see this like military mighty hero to overthrow all this oppression. And what does he come as? He comes as a suffering servant crucified, which is one of the reasons that he's on the cross. We're going to have to do a whole episode on that too, but people talk about abandonment theology, which I don't subscribe to. But when Jesus is on the cross, he basically says, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is not like an exclamation of the fact that Jesus felt lost and unsure what was happening. He's actually quoting Psalm 22. And the reason he's doing that is because every person, every believer who is familiar with the scriptures, when you invoke a psalm, you're invoking the whole psalm. That's the cultural nuance.
Right.
You don't just
Right.
cherry pick it out of context. If you invoke a psalm, it's because you're invoking the whole thing.
The
So
whole thing.
Jesus quotes Psalm 22 to take all of the followers and people who believed in him, familiar with the scriptures, to take their mind to Psalm 22. And if you read the entirety of Psalm 22, you know exactly why he sent their mind there, because it describes the cross crucifixion scene almost exactly.
Perfectly, right? It is it is literally a salvation psalm, right? It is a psalm about,
It's like, I'm fulfilling this prophecy. That's what he's like. I'm fulfilling
Yeah.
this prophecy. This is
Yeah.
this is supposed to happen. And I brought something up because you asked, why do they speak in the language? Why does it sound so obscure? Right? Why does it sound so cryptic? And Paul gives us that answer in the letter to the Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians 2:8, he says, the powers of darkness, which were the rulers of this age, he goes, if they had understood God's hidden wisdom and what Jesus was there to do, that he was the Christ the Messiah, they never would have had him crucified. Because the demons and the darkness viewed this crucifixion of the Son of God as a victory, not realizing that they were actually ushering in their own demise and the salvation of mankind.
yeah,
That's why it's so cryptic.
yeah, and so that's part of it, right? So the language is again the mystery right before them, right? And I believe it also echoes today, right? I often when I talk to people and even in other podcasts, I often refer to secrets of life. And to me, my interpretation of a secret to life, it is something that is right in front of your face. It is literally there over and over and over again. And I call it a secret because so few people actually understand it. And that's how I use the term secrets of life. Is it's like when it hits you one day, you go, oh my God, it has literally been before me my entire life, and I never opened up that secret envelope. And that's what literally what the experience of being alive at that time in my mind would be like. And I think that's what's echoed throughout the New Testament Gospels, when the disciples are literally saying to him, and they're like, what about you? Where are you going to go? And they're like, I don't know. You got anybody you can refer? Because we don't understand what the heck you're doing either, but we don't know where else to go. You're the only person that makes any sense right now. Like, and yeah, if there's an easier way, tell us, right? It's even in their humanity, you get to see what we're going through every day. I believe, right? What all of us is going through is trying to figure out, what are the parts that are important to follow. Like, where do we, and it's echoed in in the stories. Where do we put our heart, right? Because where you store your treasure is where your heart is also, right? The whole idea.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that, and it's beautiful. It's what do you put at the top, right? That's where your heart is, right? And it's funny that comes up right here, because when Jesus goes, after the baptism, Jesus goes out into the desert, right? And in the desert, he's tempted, right? This is a very, an interesting way of also introducing his ministries. Satan tempts him first with an act, right? Turn these rocks into bread. You're hungry. And he was hungry, right? Otherwise the temptation would make no sense. But he's hungry, and he says, turn these into bread. And Jesus says, no. He says, thou shalt not live on bread alone, but on every utterance of the mouth of God. And the second one, he takes him up to the top of the temple. Right? And he says, throw yourself down from here. Prove that you're God. Right? It says that he will command legions of angels to protect you, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Right? And in the story, right, and you can go and read it. Of course, the next one is, bow down to me and give me and worship me, and you can have all of these kingdoms of the world that are mine. And
Which is also an interesting point. Before you move on from that, you talk about it has to be a temptation, otherwise it doesn't make sense. It gives us a little peek behind the curtain of how this transition of governing authority has happened. When you talk about the devil being the prince of this world, you get later after the resurrection that Jesus takes back all authority. So
right.
when Satan is offering to give him all these nations, we presume that he has the authority to do that he has that authority presently, because what Jesus has come to do hasn't been fulfilled yet. So there's this hierarchy of this governance that God is allowing to play out. We get it at Babel. We see it in Deuteronomy 32:8, understanding what disinheriting the nations, that essentially God has given the governing authority over to Elohim. So hey, as placeholders of judgment, like, hey, watch over these nations while I start fresh with Abraham, because I'm going to have a people that are my own and a land that's my own, but you take care of this people in this geography. So you have these, the Bible employs things like principalities, which are powers over a principal area. This is geographical governance. Right. So this isn't a new idea, but you get an idea of a flavor of what this looks like, the fact that Satan has the authority to offer him these nations. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so important in the story, right? Depending on how deep you want to go into it, because there is a literal. There are two deeds in property transcription in the Bible, and one of the deeds is redeemed at the cross. But what's funny about the temptation portion is that if you go back and read the story, because in Jesus's answers, the first one is, "It is written, thou shalt not." He goes back to the law. Right? And again, this is in the right after his initiation, if you will. The second temptation, it is written. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. He is hearkening back to the law. And then his answer in the third temptation, get behind me, you Satan, which is echoed again with Peter when he's not understanding things, right? Get behind me. And the whole idea there, which again, this is what I love, because I heard it described, Christ described Jesus described as four things, four L's. Love, light. Do you know the four L's? I'm going to look this up because...
You said it last time.
Yeah. God, and it's escaping me now because I've got so much in my brain with this temptation and the Satan story. But the whole "get behind me, you Satan" is a change in his approach. Now he does also quote the law again, but the reason that that's so important to bring up is that this is the beginning of the fulfillment. Right? It's not that he doesn't understand it. It's not that he doesn't. It's not that the law is not important. It's that what the law means, right? That's the idea of fulfillment. What the law means is what's important, right? When they're said, well, did he really heal? The Pharisees come and say, did he heal on the Sabbath? Right? He's asking the blind man, right? Who healed you? Who did this? Right? And Christ's answer is pretty much, right, to what his answer is still to us today is, if you don't understand the difference between that and what the law is saying, you're a brood of vipers, right? You are not. It's his answer to Nicodemus when Nicodemus comes to him shortly after this story, right? And Nicodemus is trying to.
I think it's you bring up brood of vipers. I think it's important to interject here that is a scathing rebuke for a Pharisee. Because brood...
Your sound is on me. Pull that microphone closer to you because this is an important point.
Yeah, can you hear me better? All right, so brood is offspring. Yeah, this is a scathing rebuke. It's not just like a snarky comment. It's a scathing rebuke because brood of vipers is going to send their mind all the way back to what? Offspring of a serpent. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute, what are you saying here? And he wasn't mincing words. He was saying, if this is where you land, then this is the camp you're in.
Yes. Okay, there's a few reasons why that is so important too, because right in the very beginning, right, I mentioned that Christ as Jesus as a fulfillment of a promise. In the beginning, the promise that God makes to the serpent is that you will strike at his heel, right? And she will strike at your head. Right? So there's enmity from here moving, enmity. Sorry, I said it backwards. There's enmity moving forward. Right? Now, what happens in the desert when the Israelites are doing such a good job of staying in an abode? they're so misaligned. Right, and they're wailing and crying out, and they're worshiping false gods and doing all this. Vipers, right? They are sent. The snakes that are constantly biting them, until eventually they come and they finally are like, okay, like, help! What do we do here? And what does Moses do? What does God tell Moses to do? He tells him to melt down the metals and make a viper, make a snake, put it up on a pole, hold that up, and you must look at that thing, the thing that is causing you the problem, right? So if you're bitten, you have to look up, and it's by the power of God at that point that the thing that's raised up on the stick, the thing that is raised up on the stick, the thing that is causing them the problem, is what they have to look up at. It is the same thing as the crucifixion. That is an echo. That is when Christ is lifted up. That is the thing. That is the sin. This is all of your sin. And you have to look at it. It's why we still, so the Catholic Church keeps Christ on the cross, right? That's called the crucifix, right? And that's the same idea. It's echoed from the Old Testament, where when you were bitten in the desert, when the Israelites were bitten by a snake, they had to look up at the snake that was lifted up. Well, it's the same thing. When you're bitten by your sin, you must look up. You must look to the thing, because the thing that is lifted up is the thing that saves you. It's unbelievable, the value in there. Also, why does, not to go backwards, but John the Baptist, why is Jesus in the water? It's the Toho Tehum, right? It was the void and the chaos in creation in Genesis. It's the crossing of the River Jordan. It's when Joshua saves, destroys the walls of Jericho. Right? There's the crossing of the Jordan is such an important. The crossing of water is such an important symbol throughout the Old Testament that it's the piercing of Christ's side when blood and water flows. The idea is this from the side of the new temple, and Paul talks about it later. I know we got so much that we can unpack in this, but from the side of the new temple comes the waters. The blood and water, and the combination of those two things, you have the baptism that is necessary. So again, okay, let's go back somewhere. we're at the temptation, and Christ flipping everything on its head, and all of a sudden this Jesus character goes around. He finds some people to follow him, and they're not teachers, they're not scribes, they're not the people that you would expect, so to speak. And even in his ministry, he's going and he's meeting with these people who, Zacchaeus, a tax collector, the story of the man who climbs up in the tree, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, all these people who were vile, right? Speaking of vipers, right? All these people who were vile, who weren't respected in that time, is who he is going around ministering to, and people are following him. Right? He's got the attention of so many people. Everybody's interested in what he is saying. So for us, looking back, it's like, would we recognize him? Is a great question that I like to ask. Would we recognize him if we were alive at that time? What camp? I could easily see myself, amongst the Pharisees, right?
Sure.
Especially,
yeah. I think we give them a really hard time because it's really easy to armchair quarterback the Bible. And from the 21st century, now that all the Old Testament, New Testament are put together and we can read it like a novel, it's really easy to have that 20/20 hindsight and say, "Man, you're an idiot." Well, you only know I'm an idiot because I already lived out my mistakes and you got to read about it. I didn't know I was an idiot at the time.
Yeah.
So I think we give the Israelites in the wilderness a hard time. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't even get in a 6-hour road trip without people groaning about, are we there yet? And we're talking about 40 years in the desert. And you're like, these guys were weak pansies. They had God right beside them. We look on it with, and we do that so much. You talk about people earlier, you mentioned the God of the Old Testament versus the God of the New Testament. It's not a different God, it's a new covenant and it's a new situation. But all of us today look at that from a 21st century post-civil rights, post-suffrage, post-industrial revolution mindset. Like those are our presuppositions. Like we come into that with those filters and have all this accusation and attitude and judgment towards a first century people when human labor was the economy of the day. And literacy was rare. So you have to put on your ancient Near East cap, and you have to put on your first century Jewish cap under the oppression of a Roman imperialism to read the Bible correctly, because it's not written to us. It's written for us, right? It's for our benefit, but it wasn't written to us. Paul's writing to a first century Jew. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are writing to a first century Jew. Moses is writing to an ancient Near East, Mesopotamian, Babylonian era people at the beginning of human existence. Like, those aren't our people. We have no idea how to relate to them. So you have to read that with a better filter and say, I'm going to have to process this differently because it's not going to make sense if I read it like I would read a today novel or a recent history book because we're not writing in that same genre.
Yeah. So I think it's hard. We do. We give God, we even give the whole crowd that puts Christ up on the cross. We give them all, this the villain character. And I've said it before. I see it as very important when reading the Bible to understand the parts of you that are existent within each camp, right? Because there is a way in which you exist as, well, let's take David and Bathsheba, right? There is a way that you exist as both Moses and Aaron, right? There's a way that you are, right? There's a part of you that can identify with all the components of the story. And I believe it's important to identify those parts of you, right? This is the psychology idea of the shadow that we kind of mentioned before in other podcasts that Carl Jung talks about. And where we've gone, from a psychological standpoint, as far as a culture, is, we kind of try to identify with this one thing. And I think that's the goal, right? Is to get to this thing where we are one thing. But the reality in the process of growing and maturing is realizing there are different components of you, right? There are times where you're going to be, for lack of a better term, I don't really understand any other way to say it than possessed by a spirit of a thing that you have held up too high, right? So, for example, if your love of money, right, or your pride is a thing that you value too much, right? You put yourself up on a pedestal. Now all of a sudden you're going to be possessed by the spirit of that, and the consequences of that are dire, right? They're not good, and there is a way around it, right? And this is back to bring it back to a teaching of this, what I value in the teaching of Jesus, when he says, if you look after a woman and lust after her, you have already sinned, right? Because the sin comes from the heart. He then follows the next teaching up with, if your eye causes you to sin, cut it out, cast it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Well, the way that whole message is unfolded begins with what you do in your heart is where the sin originates. So the message of that time would be, you need to cut your heart out, right? You can go around loping off body parts, right? Cut off your body parts, you're going to be nothing, and you're still going to be sinning because it's your heart.
This actually goes back to the point we talked about last time about not hyper-literalizing all of the biblical text.
Right. Right, yeah, absolutely. But because what's the message? Well, what is the message there? If you want to talk poetry, right? Well, he's referring to Ezekiel. What? He's referring to Ezekiel in that message where he says, I'm going to give you a new heart. The whole message is, again, it is a literal pointing back to him, going, create in me a new heart, O God. And he says, yeah, in order to fulfill this, right? In order to live, because the calling later becomes to be my brothers and sisters. Now, if Jesus is the Son of God, right, and the Son of God, Son of Man language, that's real confusing, right? Because it's used throughout the Bible. If you reread it, you're like, these are sons of God and daughters of man, right? You can see they use the term a lot, right? It's not a one-time thing. And so to decipher what does that exactly mean about the Jesus character, it takes some discernment, right? It takes some real focus, right? You got to put some time into it. And I think that's why it's important to read the Bible, right? To understand what the story is.
And that's also why Numbers exists, right? We're not only telling a story about redemption, and that's why Matthew does what he does with the genealogy. We're not just talking about redemption, but we're also connecting Jesus to the genealogy that aligns him with a descendant of the king of David, because that's what the prophecy requires of the Messiah. So they're connecting the points to the lineage is right. All right, the miracles are there. Let's see, the suffering servant thing, Psalm 22. riding on a donkey. Like he's checking all the boxes. So Jesus is doing a lot of this intentionally to say, I'm fulfilling the prophecy. Look what I'm doing. Make sure you're paying attention here because this is prophetic and I'm doing it. He's making sure they don't miss the fact that he is the prophesied Messiah.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's so much in it that points to him. Um,
And I also want to say here, real quick, I've met some people who are like, yeah, I know Jesus was a great teacher, a great rabbi, a great sage, and I think he was a good person. And I think his teachings are really valuable, but they completely gloss over the fact, or they willfully ignore the fact that Jesus himself, he didn't overtly just go around saying, hey, I'm God. But Jesus himself invoked divine titles and Yahweh imagery and used the phrase like, before Abraham was, I am. Uh, Jesus himself, in very circular wording, said he was God. A lot of people subscribe to the parts of Jesus they're comfortable with because it makes sense to them, and they dismiss the parts like, oh, he wasn't God, but he was a really good teacher. Well, he himself said he was God. So that's important to just interject right here and say, who is Jesus really? He's God, come to earth as man. In the Old Testament, you get to see Jesus embodied as the angel of God, right? He's not incarnate as man yet, but all the times that people are interacting with the physical, manifestation of God, being the angel of the Lord, that's Jesus embodied in the Old Testament before he was incarnate in the New. Who is Jacob wrestling?
right. That's who Jacob read.
Walking down the road, and you know, God says, "Hey, make sure you listen to this angel of the Lord because my name is in him, and he won't forgive you. He won't forgive your sins." Well, the only person who has the authority to give sins is God. So the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament is Jesus before he's incarnate in the New Testament, which I think when you go back and read the Old Testament stories and realize, wait a minute, Jesus is interacting with mankind all throughout the Old Testament as the angel of God. Well, how is that possible? Well, read First Colossians. Jesus was present at creation. Matter of fact, he was the Word of God. Everything was created by Jesus for Jesus. Like, so you're like, oh my goodness, it's full circle. So when you have that information from the letters of Paul and then go back and read the Old Testament and say, input Jesus there now. Angel of the Lord, input Jesus there now. Like,
Yeah.
whoa,
So
that's cool.
that's you brought it back to me. I knew it would come. Logos, right? So life,
Yeah.
love, uh, logos, and life, love, logos, and light, right? So the logos, the word, right? He is the reason at creation. He is the word, and that's what John says. Uses that language as well. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. Yeah, so that kind of imagery is super important. One of the things that
And everything was created by him, through him, and for him. It's
right,
amazing.
it really is. It
The
is. And
preeminence,
it's,
the preeminence of Christ.
yeah.
That's what it is.
Now it is easy to dismiss in one stance, in another stance as well, because and I'm familiar, with this way of looking at it. So, okay, this is an ancient story, right? These are people who didn't know any better, right? This is the best attempt, and this is I've heard before as well, from those of us who see it this way. It's the best attempt at an ancient Near East tradition to explain human existence, right? And it's a fine. That is a fair critique of the story, right? And I ran in the camps that would, for a long time, dismiss the story as that very thing. It's our first attempt at trying to explain everything. Well, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, though, right? And I'm guilty of having done that, right? It's like, okay, well, what can we do with the story now? And I mentioned this because of what you pointed out. People say, well, he's a great teacher, right? We know now that there was probably no divine person in Jesus. Well, how do you know that, right? How do you know that? Because if you look at it from a purely, forget the religious aspect of it for a minute, right? Because I did this. This is how I ended up coming back, right? So anybody listening to this who disagrees with me, I'm happy to have a conversation around this idea. But the idea that Jesus was a man, if you accept that, right, and you say, but I'm throwing out the God part, because there are, people who claim to be Christians, right? The LDS Church, the Latter Day Saints, they don't believe that Jesus was actually God. Jehovah's Witnesses don't exactly, right? There is the Jehovah Witness, right, and they don't believe in the divinity aspect of God. Well, one of the reasons that I came to believe they crucified this Jesus character was because he was telling people the truth that he was God, right? And not just because, why else would the Pharisees say he's blaspheming, right? That is to say that he is taking credit for being something that he's not, right? He's saying blasphemy.
Yeah, they tried to kill him so many times because they were holding him guilty for blasphemy, and they only do that if they recognize that the language he's using professes that he is saying that he is God.
Right. He is claiming to be that coming, the coming to, right? And that's where God and man intersect. This is a point where humanity and divine come back together, because that was the point of creation. And I don't personally see the creation story as oh, man messed up. I see it more of a, well, when this happened, these are now the consequences of life, right? By becoming conscious of the difference between good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil, now you have a consequence, and these are the consequences of your own actions, not a punishment handed down, right? So I see it a little differently in the prescription.
Well, it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit nuanced there, because there is some part of that where they were deceived. And there's another part of that where Eve was deceived, but Adam was not, and willingly, and was complicit in choosing autonomy over trusting God. So there's some accountability mixed with deception there, and I think a lot of people, like, for whatever reason, they like to gloss over the deception part.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
So there is that aspect, this whole interwoven narrative that rebellious spiritual entities are concerning themselves and meddling in the affairs of men for the whole purpose of usurping God's plan. That's why we're here, is this like angelic spiritual warfare that had to be dealt with so that man could have a way back from the fall that we didn't usher in by ourselves.
It was a consequence
You
of
have
being.
kids, right?
What's that? I have kids, yes.
You ever have like one of your kids sort of manipulate one of the younger kids into doing something wrong just for fun? Like,
So
hey,
I have not. So unfortunately, my two live with their mother, and I call her my daughter as well, but my stepdaughter, I know her and her sisters. She has some half sisters and half brothers. I know that they're definitely guilty of that, but I haven't seen it firsthand.
so you kind of get some of that though. Like, one of them knows better, right? The angels were created before us, and they have cosmic knowledge that we are not supposed to have yet, at least at that time. And so you get some of this, like, Satan doesn't like God's plan. He thinks he can do it better. He wants to be exalted above, and he's not interested in this human creation at all. And so you get some of that sort of, hey, you should do this. I mean, you're not surely going to die, right? It's just this coercion, right? This deception.
Yeah.
And planting that seed of doubt, like, oh, maybe I do misunderstand. Maybe I misunderstood. And this apple does look really good. But to take the listeners back here, again, this literally happened, but being told in an allegorical way. They use serpent language not for a zoology lesson. The apple doesn't necessarily have to be fruit, right? We're talking about
the fruit doesn't have to be an apple.
Right. If you go back and read Ezekiel, I think it's Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14. But I think in Ezekiel 28, verse 10, he's dealing with the prince of Tyre. And then he addresses the king of Tyre, which goes back to this whole thing we were talking about earlier with this delegation of authority. It's like the prophet speaking to the man ruler, and then he's speaking to the spiritual power behind the man ruler. And when you read Ezekiel 28, verse 10, he goes through this garden scene where there was this guardian cherub who was supposed to be there. but then transgressed his place, like did something he wasn't supposed to do while he was there. It's got Eden imagery all over it. It's got Satan story all over it. And interestingly, Satan is actually from the Hebrew, from the Old Testament use of Hasatan, which literally just means the adversary. It doesn't get sort of colloquially transitioned into an actual title as Satan, like a name, until the New Testament starts bringing it up.
Right.
I just throw that out there.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's funny because there are constantly principalities named, right? Baal is named often. Beelzebub is named, right? So there's all these ideas.
Yeah, Asherah.
I'm sorry?
And then you got Asherah,
Right.
the Asherah
Yeah.
pole. Yeah.
Yeah. So throughout the Old Testament, if you go back and read it, and you start realizing, okay, there are all these different names that are given. And won't go down that rabbit hole right at the moment. But there are so many names that are given, right? And the whole idea is these names aren't exactly names either, right? They're just pointers. Because again, this goes back to my, I don't want to say my interpretation, but the value or the wisdom that I see in the book is to have the ability to look at yourself in the mirror. And again, I believe the Bible is used, when used as a mirror, it is very informative. When used as a lens, it can distort things, because the mirror allows me to see myself. And when I look at the story, I can see when I'm the deceiver. I can look and see when I'm having the spirit of distorting what the words were, right? Because Satan didn't, or the serpent in the garden, right, didn't exactly lie to Eve to deceive her. He just simply manipulated what was said in such a way that she was able to be lured in. Now, how often do we do that to ourselves? And I look at myself in this, and how often do I manipulate the word, whatever it is, manipulate reality to trick myself into doing something, one, that I don't want. And Paul talks about it, right? He says, the things that I want to do, I do not do, and the things that I do want to do, or the things that I don't want to do, I do them, right? And it's like, how often is that true for us? How often is that true for yourself? And it is the whole spirit versus flesh thing, right? The challenge for me, or the challenge as I see it, is to recognize what the message of Christ is over and over again. And this is how I come back to the wisdom of the Bible. It's, if what Christ is saying is true, and the reason they killed him is because he recognized that he was divine. He also says to everybody around him, you are my brothers and sisters. So if he is the Son of God, and it is also shared with us, and it is, if we become brothers and sisters through a rebirth, right? And that's the thing that Nicodemus comes to ask him about. He says, how is this possible, right? How? And what Jesus, unfortunately, Nicodemus says, how the heck are you, a learned person, supposed to be teaching the Hebrew people?
He's like, yeah, you think I'm talking about putting you back in the womb? You really think that's a conversation we're having right now?
He's like, seriously? Are you like Nicodemus? Like,
Yeah.
do you not understand the language I'm employing here? Like, if you can't get this, and you got some problems, like, go sit down. Quite literally. But the point of the language to me, right, in my own understanding, is that, okay, through this rebirth that he's talking about, through this baptism and spiritual rebirth, we have the ability to enter into this one way of being, to rend our hearts, right, and to say, I give mine up, and I ask for yours, right? It's the whole story over and over again. And so it's why I say that, okay, if you're those of us who can't wrap your head around the literal, and I don't mean literal here, I mean the historical truth of what's in the book. If you need just the meaning of it, you can get, and this is what I love about the way, the truth, and the life. You can get to the truth, right? You can get to the life if you start by extracting the meaning, right? So let's say you're one of us who struggles with the intellectual and spiritual, right? You try, what is it? What's going on here? Fine. Start by extracting the meaning. And as you extract the meaning, you will see the reality that Bible unfolds. But at least try extracting the meaning. And again, another controversial thing, right? It's like, I'm not here for the people who believe, right? My heart is talking to the people who don't, because I know what that life is like, right? And I know that my story unfolds in a way that's who I'm trying to talk to, right? And the believers, don't listen to me. Right? I'm not here. I can't save anybody. It's already been done. It's not my job. But so forgive me for the things that I say that are offensive to your ear. It's not what I'm not what I'm trying to do. But that's the beauty in the story of Jesus to me, right? Was that as the meaning was extracted, I started to look back and go, wow, there was so much that I missed the first time, because it overlapped with all of the other things that I was placing value in, right? For example, the development of compassion in Buddhism is the whole purpose of the Bodhisattva, right? The idea of reaching enlightenment for the good of all mankind. And so as I was on this, Buddhist journey, if you will, the Christ character kept becoming central to me, right? And again, it may be because that's how I was raised. But as it unfolded, sure, and as the onion peeled back, the layers peeled back, at its core, I realized, oh my God, like this was the message that my parents were trying to share with me as they brought me up in the church, and
yeah, but I think you're bringing up a really good point, and I think, not to sound hypercritical, but I think the church just does a poor job of stewarding faith and spiritual growth, because and I get it, I can relate to at least their plight, because you have one man standing in a pulpit speaking to a congregation and he has no idea where they're at. I mean, if you might have a new believer walking in, and you might have somebody who's digging into the ancient Near East culture and understanding the story of the Nephilim giants. But you have to have a message that paints across everybody, which is applicable and something you can understand. But then you have the small group study. And so some of this is on us too, because very few people show up to church on Wednesday that show up on Sunday morning. Right. So so people aren't digging it for themselves, they're just kind of going through the motions, checking the boxes. So a lot of people's faith and understanding in what they profess to believe stays at a very elementary Sunday school level. Yeah. They're still singing, the wise man built his house upon the rocks and the rains came tumbling down. Okay, but what now? You've been singing that song for 20 years, so what else have you learned? Like, I don't know. And so church just kind of uses a social gathering, this check in the box, and people aren't really digging in to understand what it is they say they believe, because they're so busy doing everything else. Which I say that almost accusatorily, and I can say that because I did it. But once I dug into it, like, well, if I believe this, and I believe that my eternity is predicated on this being true, then maybe I should understand it a little more. Like, how does it all work? And I don't know, one day I just had this moment of clarity. And it's like when you see all these advertisements for these social games, and the person who is advertising the game is apparently, you're kind of wondering how they navigate life, because they suck at everything they're trying to do on the advertisement. And it's because they get you to, like, you could do it better, you should play it. Right? You got this like thing in here, like, why can't you line it up? And then that was happening on my faith, and all of a sudden one day it was like, everything just locked in and made sense, because I took the time to understand how it all connected. And wow, that was mind-blowing. Is the story of Jesus was so much more robust and real and made more sense to me. And then that helped me understand God better, and that helped me understand the Old Testament storyline better, and that helped me understand how it all fit together. It was just a wonderful moment of this epiphany that brought clarity.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's most important, in my own mind, I'll speak for myself, the thing that's most important, if I were to try to sum up the ideas that we're discussing here, is that, because I haven't said it yet per se, but to me, it's what's central about the question that we're asking today. It's, if you were to ask yourself who this man really is and was and forever will be, invoke some prayer language there, right? It's, in this man, I believe that you will find the person that can allow you to become who you really are, leaving behind all of the mistakes that you've made thus far. And I, just getting goosebumps talking about that. I do believe that there's truth in that. If you have found yourself looking at yourself in the mirror, like I did, and cigarette hanging out of your mouth, bathrobe, just messy, tears, hating yourself, wishing that your life was different, better, that you were better. If you ever find yourself in that position where you want a life that is aligned with something that feels like a good purpose, that's what that character becomes to me. That's what that man is. And so I'm talking to you if you've ever felt that way. That's what the character in the Bible, that's what the man of history, that's what the figure of God become flesh, right? Jesus, that's who that is to me. It is the life, the light, the logos, the love that allows you to bring yourself to the foot of the cross, the altar, if you will, and lay yourself bare. All of you, as you are, you come and just ask for something different. That's what Jesus does. Give yourself willingly. And then you have to be willing to take up your own cross. You have to be willing to take that on. Exchange persons. That's what the covenant is about. Give who you've been thus far. Ask for forgiveness for the things that you've done that you need forgiveness for. And bring all the best parts of you and say, I want you good and bad. Take all of it. All of it. And then try to live.
Remember too.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, all I was going to say was try and live in accordance with the word now, right? Because every time the tax collector or the prostitute is met in the Bible, it isn't, no one's here to condemn you. Well, neither did I. You're good to go. No, it's now go and sin no more. Here's what he says. He says it. He says, great. Nobody else will condemn you? Great. Neither will I. Now, right, from this moment forward, go and sin no more. Right? Don't miss the mark anymore. Hit the mark. And follow me.
Right.
Follow me. God, do it, please. I try. I know that
And I
I'm
just
not.
wanted to throw out there,
Yeah.
people talk about taking up your cross and bearing your cross, but if we read the Passion story, remember, Jesus needed help carrying his own cross because he was that beaten down and broken. So that's goes back into the New Testament, not a command, but really just a really good idea is don't neglect the fellowship of believers, because sometimes you're going to need that support, need that encouragement. The Bible tells us to bear one another's burdens with love. So you can't do that if you're not with others and who are willing to bear that. Now, just as I like to take this in a little bit different direction, not to throw you off course by any means, but what you've described, which I think is important, because Jesus becomes something relationally different to everybody, depending on where they're at when they find their faith.
Absolutely.
And Jesus is philosophically and psychologically different to everybody based on how deep or intellectual or where they're at emotionally, whatever. But Jesus is something very specific ontologically, which I'd like to take a moment to walk through.
Yeah, please
do.
do. Yeah, absolutely.
Jesus is, I touched on it earlier, the hypostatic union. He's fully God and fully man at the same time. And how that works is kind of mysterious, because he has temptations that God wouldn't have, but he has knowledge that man wouldn't have. And we just have to understand that his ways are higher than our ways and thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and sort of just press the I believe button on that and it's like, that's how it works. Move on. Let's get to the point. But the bigger point is that the Bible, you brought this up and you said deed, like it was probate. And I think that is a remarkable way to look at the Bible. And I'm going to walk through why I think so and where Jesus fits into that part of the story.
Yeah, great.
People talk about the Bible being the will of God. And when they hear it, they're thinking, like, what God desires, what
Right.
God wants. Well, when you consider that the Bible is the will of God and you change your thinking to probate and inheritance language, then you get into, oh, that's why there's a First Testament, an Old Testament, and a New Testament. Why? And what do we call it today? Have you drafted up your living will and testament? Where do you think we get that idea from? The Bible is broken up into this sort of a probate language, which is why they employ inheritance, adoption, sonship,
That's right.
familial language, right?
Exactly.
And
Ex-
and it's and that's why when Jesus says, "I didn't come to abolish the law," because if you have a living will and testament and you don't file it and you shred it up and you destroy it and you get rid of it, guess what? It's no longer legally binding. So all that inheritance language that's in there, if it's not filed and is not put into motion, then it is not legally binding. You have no contract. You have no living will and testament. Why does God want his word preserved and canonized? It's because this is a living will and testament contract with probate. What happens? God has a contract and a covenant, right? It's a covenant with man, which is a promise tied to an expectation or a requirement, not even just an expectation. And man screws that up all the time. Part of that covenant, obviously, or the Old Testament covenant, was fulfilled in the life of Christ. The New Testament and the New Covenant goes into legal effect with the death of Christ, because
At
that's
the
how
death.
living will and testaments worked,
Right.
right? The person who authors it doesn't become legally binding until the author of the living will and testament dies, and then it's legally binding. So you have that part of this too. So man falls. So Adam was the first man who fell. Jesus was the last man who, well, not the last man, but he is the second Adam, right? Who did everything perfectly in obedience that Adam failed to do. Why does that matter? Because of that loophole we talked about earlier, is he adjudicated man's problem for him by coming to earth as a man. Then he makes all these proclamations, all this inheritance language, which, if we're speaking of inheritance language, a lot of these, you talked about LDS and Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, the first century Jew is really employing the vernacular of, oh shoot, I just lost it. Uh, we'll get back there. The
Familiar
point
language,
is,
inheritance language.
yeah, it is, but they talk about being the firstborn. When they use firstborn language, they're not necessarily talking about timing of lineage. That's language that talks about inheritance. It's talking about
Right.
that sort of probate language. So when we talk about the firstborn of creation, it doesn't mean that he was created first. That's employing language about inheritance. So Jesus being the inheritor of creation. So I just want to throw that out there, because when you hyperliteralize that type of language, oh, it says he was firstborn, so he must have been created. Well, that's not what the language means. That's how it's given to us in English, because that's the best way we have to explain it and understand it. But it really talks about inheritance language. So what I'm getting to is, you have this land, you have this inheritance, eternal life, the new creation, new heaven and earth. All the stuff is promised to those who are grafted in to the family of God. The family of God gets to inherit the promises of God. The inheritance language, that's why this is here. So what happens? Well, Jesus dies to put that living will and testament contract into full effect.
Hmm.
But the beautiful part about it is, he resurrects to enforce this contract that was put into legal motion at his death. So you got that part of Jesus too, where how is he the savior of mankind? Well, because he undid the problem that man put into the world. He's found victory over sin and death. He's made this promise of inheritance of us being the bridegroom and bride. He dies to enforce his living will and testament, and then resurrects and ascends to take back all authority of heaven and earth. He takes back that language. It's a whole big legal transaction. I'm
Right.
taking back authority of all of my creation because I died to do so. So now it's all mine. And so the future hope is, all right, hang out. I have some more stuff to do. I'm coming back, and we're going to make this thing like it was supposed to be in the beginning. I've taken care of the problem. Those who chose believing loyalty in me, those who chose to be in my family will be at the wedding banquet, and those who didn't won't. So until the fullness of the Gentile is complete, and the hardening of the Israelis, not today, present days, but a hardening of
Right.
the Israelites of the Jews is softened, so they can be jealous for their God again and come back into the fold of the family. The Bible talks about it being called long suffering. Like, God isn't slow as we see slow. He's patient and not willing to lose anybody. So he's giving everybody the chance to choose believing loyalty into the family of God, so that when the finality of absolution and eternity happen, as many people who would come to the faith will come to the faith. And that's what Jesus accomplishes, like, ontologically. It's like, it's good to have that emotional aspect of who is Jesus to me. But what I want people to remember is, separate from who Jesus is to you, Jesus is something altogether him by himself, regardless of how he fits into your framework emotionally or psychologically or philosophically. See what I mean? Like, it's important to have that because that's how we understand and relate and talk about it. But Jesus is something altogether different, whether you believe in him or not.
So I think there's huge value, and I think we both agree on that, is there is such a huge value in my own mind as well in understanding that there is a reality that is not subject to my interpretation of it, right? And that is true of this character, right? And that's why I use the term character, right? And some of that comes from, I was an actor, right? And so when you build a character, right, when you prepare, you build the role and you ultimately come to a character. It's not a caricature, right? And so when I say the word this character, that's what I'm trying to point at, right? There is this reality that exists outside of my own interpretation of it, or not subject to my even ability to wrap my head around it. Thank God, right? Because I am so limited in my ability to understand it. Now, personally, again, this is why I like to call the Bible a mirror, right? It's my ability to see myself in the story and in the character of Christ affects me insofar as I'm able to move forward with information of value. But yeah, I think it's absolutely important to, man, if you can develop that relationship and then explore the nature of God. In my own experience, and again, I went from walking away to coming back. The richness, right? I have books up here. This is Love, Fulton Sheen, Thomas Aquinas. I have all these great books that are source, Christology, right? All these explorations of what this God character is, right? In the Nicene Creed, in Nicaea was a council in the 4th century early church. One of the things that it says about God and Jesus in particular, it says that Jesus is, I believe in Jesus Christ our Lord, right? The only begotten Son. And I bring this up just because of the character of, well, how does God have a son, right? How is that a thing? How is it really God then, right? The whole idea of 3 persons in one being, the Trinity. Again, a mystery of the church, right? A mystery of the understanding of God. The way that the Nicaea Council married it was God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Meaning, the same way that a candle. Have you ever held a candle and taken a second candle to it? We can't quite understand how that light comes from light, but that's the mystery that God is in and of himself. Try wrapping your head around it. Go for it. Have at it, right? But that's the best that we can come to. And that's what the early church said. begotten, not made, one in being with the Father. They've now they've changed the term to consubstantial with the Father, or not changed it. They reverted to language more close related. But it's an unbelievable thing to wrap your head around for that reason of developing your own personal journey, right? Or in my mind, for the reason of developing your own personal journey. If you only think of it in how I can relate to it, I believe you're right. You're going to miss the point. I think that it can only enrich your experience of it if you do recognize that there is and that's what ontological really means, right? There is a reality of this character of Christ that exists completely independent of you. Not needed.
Well, there's also some language to sort of parse through when it comes to like the Hebrew syntax and because you have a point even in Genesis, right, where God says, take your only begotten son, Isaac. But that's not accurate because he had Ishmael before Isaac. So Isaac wasn't even his only son, and he wasn't his first son. So the begotten language can a lot of times refer to as uniquely different or uniquely set apart or special. Like there's something different about this son that doesn't necessarily presuppose creation or birth or
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great point.
Or singularity. So there's begotten language that points to a different meaning than how it's sort of understood by us. Because if God said, take your only begotten son, Isaac,
yeah.
Well, then either God forgot about Ishmael, or
right.
or we don't speak the ancient Near East Hebrew language. So they're trying to say something there that's something very specific and special and different about Isaac that makes him unique for the scene where there's a sacrifice that's going to happen. It's not because Isaac was his only son, but there was something uniquely different about Isaac. And the same thing is the sort of same language employed about Jesus. It's not that he was firstborn, or is that there's something uniquely different about Jesus, God, than Yahweh God, than Holy Spirit God. And so that begotten language should be sort of chewed on as unique, special, rather than created or singular.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the challenge that's also part of the challenge of language in and of itself, right? Is it does make it difficult to parse, right? We miss out on what the original meanings mean, right? And what was really being intended. So, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's why I say, if all that you can get to, right? If you're of the camp, right? Those of us who, if all you can get is the meaning extracted from it, it's an opportunity to approach it, right? What the language means from a poetic, symbolic language story. Listen, and again, I'm talking to whoever it is out there that can appreciate that but can't quite get past it. Start there, right? Start there. Reach out to me. Let's talk, right? Like, let's have a conversation about that. Because there's so much to it. There's so much more to it than even. I mean, you can't approach. I don't think approaching it one time is enough. But again, it's what I say. This man allows us, right? This character of Jesus allows us to approach it in such a way that by taking up willingly, right? By willingly taking up a journey towards the light and following this character, following this person, this God figure in Jesus. In my own experience, and from as far as I can tell, it is the way that we can arrive at a truth and when I say truth in being, I mean a way of being that, and you're alluding to, the ability to, the access of all salvation, right? That type of idea, right? Not in a judgmental, leave other people behind way, but in a way of how do you, right? And my personal thoughts on this are, your journey is your journey. I love to talk to you about your journey, Josh, because it's your journey, and there are going to be people who relate to that. I want other people to reach out to us and talk to us about their journey, because your journey is your journey. But there is a way, and that's why I think we talk about this. There's a way that there's a universal truth that fits into that. And in my mind also makes it easier, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I would have to echo what you said. The community has a value too, right? I don't know which
And
one.
you know, we've said it over and over again, but it's if whether you're dialing through it academically or psychologically, the Bible says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father except through him. The New Testament Gospels show us that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So we have the character of God personified in Jesus. We have the mission of God, which is to come to earth to redeem mankind from ourselves in a way that we couldn't, because he cherishes his creation so much that he not felt like, that's a misrepresentation.
Right. Limitation
Because
of
he
language.
knew what he had to do, but that we were worth dying for. The creation was worth dying for. And he's not limited to our today. He's seen the stuff that we haven't even done yet and still thinks that we were valuable enough to redeem and die for, to make a way for us when we didn't have a way, out of this mess that has been created over millennia. And with a future hope that there's something better, that death isn't the end, that we resurrect because he resurrected. So he came and personified the hope that was already an understood promise. Like, yeah, we know there's a resurrection. And Jesus did it. Say, okay, now we know there's a resurrection because we've seen it. It's written down. We can have the future hope in eternity that God is who he said he is, that Jesus was who he said he was and is who he says he is. And because of those two truths, we can believe in the hope that our eternity is secure in him, because that's where we placed our believing, loyalty, and allegiance. So that's who Jesus can be relationally and ontologically at the same time, is the future hope, because he personified the character of God and showed us the care God has for us. And what does he ask for us in return? Now that the law is fulfilled, what do we do? Well, Galatians 5:14 says it really easily, but Jesus also says, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two big commandments. Oh, and go and create disciples. Get other people. Bring other people into the fold. Adopt more people into the family. We want to grow this family. We want to have a big, huge wedding banquet at the end. Invite all your friends. Right? That's something you're excited to go do. You know, if I want to tell you why you should come up to Pennsylvania and go to Hershey Park, I'm not going to tell you, well, you should come up here and go to Hershey Park because it's a lot better than going to hell. People should not sell salvation as a hell avoidance measure like fire insurance, right? This isn't about avoiding hell. It's about coming into a relationship with peace and hope and love and shared compassion. That's what Jesus personified. But if I tell you come to Hershey, I'm going to tell you all the great things about it. What do I expect? I went there and I had the best turkey leg I've ever had, and this ride was really cool. Like, you get excited about it. You share your experience because I want you to come with me to enjoy the experience I had, because I want you to have that experience. That's how we share the word of God, the experience we have of Jesus. Like, what has your Christian walk been? What changed in you internally that makes you smile more than I do? Because I want what you have. What don't I have? And I'm like, well, do you have Jesus? Like, what do you mean? Cool, let's talk about that. It's the same idea. It's not like you go and somebody puts your thumb on them and say, you're headed to hell if you don't say these magic words and come sit in church every Sunday. Because now you have people sitting in pews with no understanding, no relationship, no recollection of what's happening, just because they don't want to burn for eternity, which I don't even know if that's the accurate representation anyway. That's more conjecture. That's another episode.
Yeah, seriously. I think it's such a challenge, because hell avoidance mechanism is from sin to syndrome, is a quote that I heard recently. I said,
it's not the gospel. That is never the focus of the gospel. You'll never see Jesus talking to anybody, Paul talking to anybody. Nobody is ever talking about avoiding the lake of fire. That is not the starting point, and that's not the ending point. So where did we get the fire and brimstone from? Not the Bible. We got it from religion and oppression.
From religion, right? And so that's why I hate to call myself an anti-religious, but I still am, right? I don't know what religion I would fall into per se, meaning denomination, right? As far as, I don't think there's many Christian gatherings of churches that would accept me as a member, right? Or should, right? Which is probably good evidence that, they're probably in a better direction than I am. But no, I'll say this as tongue in cheek, right? I like to make jokes. I personally, and I've said it before, right? And again, it's not to call into question the efficacy of the cross or of Christ and his mission, but my own life is an attempt to live in alignment with these principles and the person in the story, the character of Christ that I've identified as worth following, even though I can see, and I say again, I say with hope that I'm wrong, that that I'm going to hell, right? I'm not trying to be a guru here, right? I'm not trying to be a come follow me, right? That guy's already come, okay? So I guess that's part of the reason I say it, but it's also in that because I know what I deserve, which is why I say it, and I want to live my life. I think I've read this before on another podcast, but I have a writing here that I've read, and at the end, it says my eulogy. At the end, I get to give it, right? I can only imagine the surprised look on his face, meaning on my own face, as he stands before his Creator and hears him say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." So that's the end of my eulogy. And that is the hope that I live with, right? Because I hope to live my life leaving behind everything that came before and comes before. And it says here, right before that, and if by some chance he made it to heaven, and it would only be by grace, I can only imagine the surprised look on his face as he stands before his Creator and hears him say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." That's my eulogy, right? That's how it ends. I live my life in such a way that I do hope, right, that I stand there one day, but would also not be surprised if I didn't, right? I wouldn't be resentful if I didn't. I would be
Well, I
I
think
would
that
be
goes right in
aware.
line with
What's
working
that?
out your. I think goes right in line with working out your salvation with fear and trembling.
Exactly.
You don't want to have the arrogance. You don't have the arrogance that you know for sure, but you don't want to have the doom and gloom that you know for sure the other way either. You're
Exactly.
not for sure you're going to hell, but
Yeah.
don't boast in your
Right.
arrogance of going to heaven because
Yeah.
you don't know how many people are going to say, "Hey, we profess your name and perform many miracles in your name," and what did you say? Like, be gone! I never knew you.
Yeah. I
The
never
question
knew.
is, do you know him? And do you lead people to him with your life, not just your words? And that's the best we can try to do, right? We talked about it before. Sanctification is the process of becoming what
Yeah.
you already are, as
Yeah.
imperfectly as you can.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, listen, I
Or as
think,
you brought up some recovery, so progress, not perfection, right? I think people hold
yeah,
themselves to an impossible standard when it comes to this. They get
yeah,
offended by things like you calling Jesus the character or me saying the biblical narrative because they get hypersensitive when it comes to the Bible. We don't mean it disrespectfully. We're just talking about it academically or psychologically, how people
yeah,
sort of parse these ideas.
yeah. And for us, that's the best way. That's the best way I know how to talk about it. You know what I mean? And so if we're gonna have a so I do. Let me throw that out there. If I've offended you with the things that I've said, that was not my intention, and in no way, shape, or form did I set out to do that. So, you know,
I just want to make people think differently about the Bible. So I don't want to be
yeah,
an echo chamber of everything everybody's already heard in church. Like, let's challenge your preconceived notions. What do you think you know about the Bible? Is it in the Bible or did it come from grandma? Did you hear it
yeah,
at the pulpit in Sunday school? Is it actually in the Bible? Like, you got to ask yourself these questions because
yeah,
what is the Bible? Even the Bible says what? Test all things.
yeah. I
Don't
think
just
it's
don't. Or what was it? What was it? Was it what was that show? But don't take my word for it. Reading Rainbow.
Reading
Right?
Rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
even I mean, every pastor should like have that caveat. Don't take my word for it. Go seek out the scriptures.
yeah.
And that's not really the Catholic position, right? The Catholic kind of like you should let the priest do this because you're probably going to get it wrong. Which I understand some of the value in that, but you need to go and read it.
Yeah, so I think so. The old, I think that's an old Catholic approach, right? Because, like I said, I used to teach Bible study as a Catholic, and there's a lot more movement back towards reading Scripture for yourself and understanding it.
Good,
I
good.
think, yeah, yeah. In my understanding, now I don't consider myself a Catholic. I consider myself raised Catholic, right? Recovering
I
Catholic.
understand. Some
If
people
I'm being-
recovering Catholics. I think I think the Eastern Orthodox Church still kind of dissuades people from
Yes.
reading it on their own.
Yeah, yeah, and I get that, right? It's like the shepherd takes care of the sheep, all idea. It makes sense, but yeah, it's there are many ways in which I look at the church, and you know, if I look at the historical version of the church, I think, ah, man, there's so much in it that it's like, even right now with the way the politics is playing out with the Pope and all of that, it's like there's so much to it. I used to call it when I was a militant atheist. I called it the corporation, and there's a way in which the tongue-in-cheek, you know, mockery of the institution, I still kind of I hold dear to my heart. I don't think that I don't think that this character came to build new churches. Right? I think he literally came to establish one way of being. Right, and if you go in through the third temple in recognition of, you know, what that really is, it's us, right? It's the body of Christ. It's the, you know, the individuals. Doesn't
I just
necessarily
posted
mean.
about that yesterday.
Did you? It's
I did. Do Christians realize that we are the third temple? Like
yeah,
Zechariah talks about the third temple without walls, and the New Testament always employs that. Hey, you've given a new heart. You're a temple of the Holy Spirit. Hello.
yeah. Like again, the tabernacle idea, the
But
whole.
yeah, I think that what you pointed out earlier is just religion, and by that I mean like religious institutions. It's just another
Institution. Yeah.
imperfect man-made way to tangibly measure how good they're doing at something and missing the mark because Jesus was killed by religious people. Jesus came and rebuked religious people. He went out and found the exiles and the outcasts and the untouchables because those were the people who needed to know they mattered and what God
Yeah.
was doing for
Yeah.
them.
For them.
Everybody who thinks they already all figured out, they're not listening to anything you have to say because they already know it. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is my salvation. I got mine. I'm going to put my feet up and ride this out. You can't
Yeah.
tell me anything.
Yeah. I think it's really important too, and I do want to say it on that note. When it comes to those who are in the institutions right now, if you will, I'm not saying that you're wrong either. Okay, I
Yeah.
did come around, you know, from where I did used to look and say, all those institutions are corrupt. I do see the value in the community, right? And how else are you supposed to lean on each other in community without those institutions existing? So please don't take that the wrong way either, right? If you're listening to this and saying, "Oh well, then, you know, like he's sitting in a place of judgment," I'm not. Listen, I've got no ivory tower, right? It just doesn't exist for me anymore. I'm looking and saying, no, no, there's real value in that, and there's some really great people within those
Absolutely.
existing structures, if you will, that don't have an academic approach to this and are truly just some of the best people with the most, you know, loving hearts of Christ, if you will, right? And so I do want to, I guess I will put that out there. God, some of the people who are in heaven now praying for me, I firmly believe, are some of those people, right? Some great Catholics who, you know, probably watching me right now going, thank God you're back, right? Like, and better than I was before, I believe. I'm just grateful to be here. I'm grateful that we get to do this, and I know you got somewhere to be. I know we've been going for. Oh, you're on mute. See if I can. No, I can't unmute you. But yeah, I
Is
know
that
we're
better?
going 2 hours here, which Dude, I think the 2 hours is the minimum that we can spend. But it's been a great, I think this has been a great exploration of the question. And I appreciate you joining me to do this morning. And I'm definitely looking forward to our next one.
Am I still muted?
No, I hear you.
Oh, okay, I was like, I don't know what's happening. Yeah, no, it's really good. Like you kind of sign off with, this is our conversation. Doesn't mean we know it all. We like talking about it. So if you want to challenge, you want to submit a topic we can walk through, or you got questions. I think it's fun to do this, and I think it's good to let people not be afraid to ask questions about the Bible.
Yeah.
Created it as a supernatural book, and it's just not that. It's a collection about God's story of redemption of mankind, and we can. Bible says to test all things. We can ask questions. We can challenge whether we understand it correctly, whether other people understand it correctly, and we may not all get it right, but at least we're talking about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do. I want to throw it out there too. If you hear something that you agree with and want to talk about, disagree with and want to talk about, didn't hear and want to hear about, right? Talk about, like, reach out to us. You know, again, we're here just to me, it's an exploration of our journeys, right? And if what we share can help somebody, then I'd like to be there to do that. And if it's a stumbling block for you, I'd like to be there to talk about that too. You know, I had somebody reach out to me and ask me to share my story. You know, he wanted me to say, hey, well, he said to me, it's time for you to tell your story. How did you get here? Because I think people need to hear it. And so I thought to myself, I said, hey, you know what? I might just do a podcast on that, right? I might just give my story one day. But it made me think too. I said, I'd love to hear Josh's story. So we might have to do that, where we sit down together and I kind of walk through, just asking you to lay out, how'd you get here? Where'd you come from? Give us your testimony.
My story is actually boring. I was born a Bible thumping believer and been perfect ever since. I don't know.
Driving
Yeah, I have similar. I don't think I went militant atheist like you did, but I definitely went sort of apathetic for a while.
Yeah.
Like, who cares?
I think there's a lot more
Yeah,
of that out there.
we could do that.
I think too. You know what I mean? I think there's so many people who, and again, why your story would be of value is because there's people who go down that path. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I'll look forward to doing this again soon, and I appreciate you.
And always.
Enjoy your week, and I'll talk to you again soon, bud.
Yeah, you too. Have a good one.